Welcome to the Questionistas podcast. I'm Spencer Buchanan.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Thomas.
So, Thomas, what's the topic today?
Topic is why questions, which I thought was pretty relevant to the podcast, considering we are the Questionistas. Questionistas? That Spanish is going to throw off my pronunciation here.
Another question.
Another question. Yeah. In fact, I had to do a bunch of research to figure out if questionistas was feminine, but apparently in Greek and Latin and English and Italian, it's all gender neutral.
So those are all answers, Thomas.
Those are
which is
all
an
answers.
important part of the question.
Which is an important part of the question, but probably not quite as important.
Why are we focusing on questions?
I think that questions, the thing that I find most useful about questions is that they open up your thinking and they start stretching out your thinking for more options rather than just focusing down on some answer that you might already have. It allows you to explore the space, which gives you more room to discover more things about it.
Wonderful. And Spencer, why do questions interest you?
I think that's how we learn. We question whether it's a verbal question or just a conscious question of that's we're using to learn about our environment and trying to improve and want to be better than what we currently are. The adjective around questions is curiosity. If we're not curious, then we're not growing and we're not improving on what we could be.
Yeah, I love that you brought up curiosity because that's a huge reason why I'm interested in questions also. It seems like when I was growing up, I always felt being questioned was somewhat of a stressful situation, either in school or at work. I always kind of scrambled for an answer, but doing self-exploration, I found questions to be a very valuable tool, and potentially having an question can almost have an infinite potential, while an answer is a very finite thing, which can be helpful. Should I turn left at a stop sign or not? Is the answer is helpful. But the right questions can really open up parts of yourself that were unexplored.
I feel like good answers can be useful, but they're usually useful up to a certain point. Even the best answers are only useful up to a certain point, but the best questions, kind of with what you're saying, can be the gift that keeps on giving. There are certain questions that you can always ask again and find more or deeper answers to. One thing I also wanted to talk about, I kind of wanted to get in a little bit into definitions. What is a question?
That is a question.
That's a question?
What is a question?
What is a question is a question.
I've never really thought about what a question is. I guess it's tied to curiosity, something said in a uncertain manner with a positive inflection at the end, like that.
Like you just did. I love it.
My initial response was probably what I learned in grammar in elementary was, well, it's got to have a question mark at the end, and whatever you say, as long as it has a question mark at the end, it becomes a question.
Exactly.
And now I'm thinking about my grammar in college, which is very different than grammar in high school. Grammar in high school is usually, here's the rules. And they get to college and they're like, by the way, all the rules are made up. It's not necessarily loosey-goosey, but it's about how everyone else is using it. But in a lot of cases, and from what I think, a question is the first half of something with a very obvious open ending. It was actually Mike at our former job, Chris. We were talking about automatically finishing patterns. Like if somebody said, for example, half a quote from a movie, and your brain goes, ooh, I know the other half of that pattern. Or somebody says a joke or something that sounds like a good setup for a joke, and you go, here's the joke.
Finishing the thought, or like the other half of it.
Finishing the pattern. And then the brain goes, ooh, I just finished a pattern. That was nice. I did a thing.
Satisfaction. And so in that instance, the question is the first half of the pattern, and the answer is the second half of the pattern.
Yeah. And kind of related to that is something that I've thought a lot about is most of the time when you even if you just hear a question, your brain will automatically start trying to answer it.
Hmm.
It's almost a form of cognitive violence in a way because you can ask somebody a question and their brain will start looking for the answer,
Wouldn't you be
not
happier if your
voluntarily.
skin looked like this? Let me sit and let me show you this skincare product. Feel like we've all
Right.
encountered those leading questions or those questions with a motive.
Yeah. Or like, and that's the thing about hearing questions or asking questions. They can percolate in someone's mind for a long time after. In fact, I've had questions that I've thought about, and then my subconscious works on it for a while, and then it
Hmm.
passes up an answer to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, wow, I didn't even realize I was thinking about that question.
So from that,
So
go ahead, Scott.
I'm curious about what you guys were talking about. I was with in relation to responding and just reacting to the answer. I've got a friend that she recently just had her first child. She, the way she talked about being pregnant and prior before having children, she said that she wasn't like super like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to be a mother because my life is all about being a mother. And and now that she has this child, she can't stop talking about it. And she's like, I love it to death.
Yeah.
This baby, and she's just like, I can't comprehend the amount of love that I have for this. And she's like,
Oh.
but at the same time, I realize that when the baby starts crying, there, which is the question, will you?
Hmm.
I'm crying. Will you respond to me, and will you stop me from crying? And her answer is, sure. Let me go feed you, change you, do whatever I need to do. The what was interesting about that is she's like, I'm just responding to things. We're just a whole bunch of earthworms was the phrase that she gave.
Wonderful.
What does
And
that mean?
all,
Yeah.
yeah, well, and I thought, how what an interesting way of describing what it's like to be a parent, where all you're doing is just reacting to the questions that your child is giving you, which is, will you feed me, will you take care of me,
Hmm.
and you're like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And I don't know if it's a self-control thing, because I think it's a conscious and intentional answer to, yes, okay, I'm going to do this, but at the same time, there's a part of her that I think she's admitting to, that she's just like, I'm just doing it because that's what earthworms do, is they get a certain chemical high in their brain, whether it's oxytocin or whether it's dopamine, for responding to the child and being able to take care of the child. And and I thought such an interesting observation related to what is a question and what are we doing with questions and answers. Are we just responding to them because we're programmed to since day one,
Hmm.
or are we able to be more than earthworms when it comes to questions, and be able to, I really like the phrase, sit with questions or sit with a problem. And maybe it's not even a question yet, it's just a problem
Yeah.
that we've identified. We don't even know what the heck to ask for, how to solve the problem. We just need to know, is this a problem, and what does this problem look like, before we actually even start asking, what do we do about it.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to something I was actually just thinking about was the relationships of questions and answers to problems and solutions.
Hmm.
In a lot of the literature I've studied, they have a lot of overlap and in a lot of places can be interchangeable. And when it comes to when you're talking about sitting with the question, one thing that helps you take better advantage of your questions is let me pull up got my note here, is to keep asking them. So there's two aspects to this I want to talk about. One is our brain we like to just complete the pattern. And if we can, we'll just move on. Like
Hmm.
somebody asks a question, you just complete it and move on. But there's tactics like keep asking, what is the problem, to refine your definition of what the problem is.
That is taking your current situation or discomfort or some situation you want to change, and then continuing trying to refine backwards instead of landing on the first question, where
Yeah,
I might be, oh, I'm unhappy or I need to put gas in my car and I can't afford it, or and what is the problem behind this? What is the root, I guess, of this?
yeah, and that's another tactic apart from asking like what is the problem over and over again is asking why is that or how did that come to be at
Hmm.
least 7 times.
Oh,
Like
wow.
where did that come from? Okay, where did that come from? Okay, where did that come from? Or why is that happening? And that can really get you into digging deeper. There's actually a good example of this from Orson Scott Card. He's mainly talking about brainstorming ideas for books and stuff. He says, "Don't stop at your first idea. It's a
Hmm.
cliche. Keep thinking. Your second idea, third idea, fourth. Those are where you'll find the interesting and novel." And another quote very similar from him is, "Don't let your idea sit there without answering. Don't believe the first answer that comes to mind either. Chances are good that the very first answer you come up with will be a cliche. The second one, too. Keep asking the questions, trying for more answers."
Well, I like that you brought that up because it kind of like what you see in this and what Spencer sees in this kind of defines for me the spectrum or like the possible range of questions. Because in Spencer's example, we have the baby, which is pre-verbal, I hope, that has discomfort and is expressing itself non-verbally, through crying. And then we have the mother who is verbal and then is trying to find out what is wrong with my child? How can I help it? And then Thomas, you have almost the other end of the spectrum, which is the idea spectrum or the creative spectrum, where we're trying to create something anew, where it might not be a life problem, but it might be something within yourself that's trying to find expression. And so we have these like very base life poopy diapers, and then we've got this something that's trying to be expressed itself in a unique and engaging fashion. And so I find it interesting that questions really run the whole gamut of our lives from the most simple, primal, all the way up to how can I create something? So when you use those tactics, Thomas, of continuing to ask yourself a question and then not settling on the first answer, do you find those to be more helpful in kind of a work context, or have you also used those in a life context?
Let's see. I definitely find them more helpful because, well, especially because I've studied so many reasons that we have got a lot of biases and shortcuts built into our circuitry
Mm,
of our brains, and they're made that way to help us because there's so much going on in the world that we need some shortcuts or we're going to go crazy. But that doesn't mean the shortcuts always give us the best answer. They give us the quickest answer. But like for example, when it comes to work, I'm a UX designer, design websites, and sometimes the client or the product manager will be like, "Hey, I have this need. My question is, I need to resolve this need."
mm.
And funny thing is, sometimes they'll even start with like they'll come to you with the question and the answer. So I'd love to hear Spencer talk a little bit about this too, because sometimes we have to go do this exercise with them a bit and say, okay, you came to us with this question saying that this is the need. Let's go a bit deeper into that and see maybe actually this isn't the question. There's a deeper question hiding behind that. And let's
Mm.
address that question and that need. And then we'll address the need that you brought up and a whole bunch of needs that you didn't.
Almost a
Um,
half-baked answer.
yeah. And granted, they're doing what's natural, right? They're like, oh, I see a need, and here's what I think the need needs to be. But sheesh, there was one example I heard from it. It's a screenplay writing book, and it was talking about bad stories in
Mhm.
films. Like you can have a very well built building, and the contractors and everybody did a great job, but the fundamental architecture is garbage. And he was talking about There are so many problems in stories and things nowadays that could be resolved with 5 minutes and a pencil and a paper.
Hmm.
Just stopping and thinking for a minute. That's something I thought Spencer was actually always really good at.
Hmm.
I
I,
set you up.
yeah, I mean, you've talked about a lot of things that touch to me because I am a product manager, and what's funny is most of the time you'd think, well, a product manager gets to decide what the problem is and what to resolve it, but we're beholden to the stakeholders, and so we're beholden to these leaders and these managers, and they're like, well, here's the problem. Let me tell you what the problem is. And it's like, did you even ask a question? You went straight to an answer, and you've already decided what the problem is. And I fail at my job when I don't continue to ask those questions, and I say,
Uh,
no, but what's really happening? No, but really, what's happening? And quite often I say, what really is the problem here? And they're like, well, the problem is that they can't click the button. I'm like, no, the problem is they don't want to click the button. The problem is we haven't motivated them, or we haven't shown them the importance of clicking that button,
hmm.
or buying the product we want them, or doing the thing that we want them to do. We haven't prepared them. We haven't. Let's go back, like you said, a couple steps and ask questions that preclude the first question to find out where the breakdown is, because clearly there's a breakdown somewhere, and it's happening a lot earlier than it is. I find myself, whether it's intentionally saying, well, hold on, we're only at question 6, we haven't done question 7 yet, having to ask that question a lot of time. However, there's a part to that, which is usually at some point we've formulated a hypothesis, and I try really hard to, instead of saying, hey, we have an answer, we have a hypothesis. The only way that we can validate that hypothesis is we need to go and do some testing, or we need to try it out. We need to put this in front of the person and say, well, we think the problem is this, but we're talking, what is a question? What's an answer? Part of my thinking and what I'm wondering is, what's a hypothesis? Where does that fit in all of this?
Yeah.
Because I
I
find
was
most
just
of
thinking
the
that that's really fascinating because it does serve kind of a different function. Go
So
ahead,
right,
what's
and
Spencer.
an
it's kind of a question and
incubator
kind of an answer.
answer?
Yeah, incubator answer. I like that.
Hmm. I like that a lot. Two things I want to make sure we touch on. I want to come back to the hypothesis thing, but there was two other things that you brought up, Spencer, that made me think. I've seen this happen when I'm asking questions, and I've seen this happen to you, Spencer, when you've asked questions in the organizations that we've worked at together. What can happen if you continue to ask questions with other people who are not interested in asking any more questions?
Oh, I hate that at some point that becomes the crux of the biggest problem that we have, is our impatience for questions.
In my experience, the pain of not knowing is too much for some people. And being
Mm.
forced to think means that I have to expend so much energy that I just don't want to do it because
The
I've already
discomfort with an
settled.
open question.
Yeah, right.
It's an unfinished pattern.
Why do
Yeah.
you think we're so? Are we talking about questions, or are we just talking about discomfort? Like, is that the biggest problem here? Is why discomfort?
I don't know, because can you have questions without can you be comfortable with questions? Can you be comfortable with open-ended patterns that aren't finished? Is that something humans can do?
Or is discomfort the source of questioning?
Ooh.
Tell me more, Chris.
Well, in that instance, there's some situation that we feel needs to be changed. In our work situation, that's often quarter four's numbers aren't what the CFO think it should be, and therefore it's everyone else's problem. So there's a situation that needs to be changed, the dirty diaper or the website not functioning correctly. And therefore there's a disconnect or a disconnect between our ideal idea of reality and the reality we're experiencing right now. And the gate or the ladder from our current reality to that ideal reality begins with a question and ends with an answer, theoretically.
Because you don't create a hypothesis and just sit on it. The hypothesis is a transitory state.
When it comes from a not knowing, or it comes from an observation and a questioning, why is this happening? It seems, at least in a lot of scientific hypotheses, like, why did this apple hit my head?
Why didn't it just stay up there?
Leads to the hypothesis of, well, maybe heavy things attract heavy other things, and then we get gravity. I would like just a short aside back to your initial life story, Spencer, and the idea of your friend who has this young child sitting down with their crying child with a piece of paper and a pencil and starting to write down, okay, why are you crying? No, really, why are you crying? The baby might stop crying from wondering what has possessed their mother to not give them comfort. But it points toward the tools that we need to fit the situation. Like you're saying, the mother with the crying child is at a very low level of stimulus response. Crying baby, do something. But most of us, at least who work in the knowledge fields, we have a million stimuli and trying to figure out what the most healthy response would be.
Yeah. Let me tell you one problem that I've had with asking questions, and it's not, I don't think it's that it's people that are impatient because they don't want to sit there. Well, maybe it's partially that, but it's just the time, the trying to find time to get a hold of the person to spend time with them long enough to ask them questions. So let me counter the suggestion that it is purely a discomfort issue. And let's assume for a second that the person is not avoiding trying to ask questions. It's just, I don't have time, especially in what you said of we have countless influences on us, both digitally and physically, that in this day and age that are distracting us from being able to ask questions, that they don't have time because they have not an inability for discomfort, but an inability just to spend time asking the question or thinking about the question.
So I'm wondering whether that is they already have too many answers.
Wait, what?
Like they're being fed answers all the time from the media, from their phone. Go ahead.
Right. Like, if I don't have time for something, that means I've already made a decision that something else is more important. And that something else has to be an answer to the question, what should I be doing right now? If you have a coworker who said, I don't have time for that, they've already asked themselves the question and decided upon the answer.
Is this question important enough for me to spend time on it right now?
Right.
Or spend time on it?
Or have they already had a central answer of what I need to do today, what I need to do this week, what I need to do this quarter, that any other question is not as important as that answer they've already decided upon?
So then what's the point of questions? If ChatGPT will give me 16 answers to this question, this podcast is moot because we've already got technology and plenty of people sufficiently already doing this.
Well, it was a good time talking to you guys. I guess I'm going to go back to ChatGPT.
Wrap it up.
Wrap it up. The show's over.
We did it after
yes. We have finished it.
One
we
and
have
done,
found the
baby.
answer to the question of what is this podcast meant to achieve.
Thin commercial for ChatGPT.
Oh gosh.
I'm not saying that's a healthy stance, Spencer. I'm saying that might be the stance of, or that might be like the internal structure of someone who says, I don't have time to meet with you to talk about this.
Yeah.
Well, kind of related to that, I mentioned a few biases earlier, or I mentioned a little bit about biases. One reason for that is that you, when something requires action, you have a point where you have to pick an answer and move forward. And I know sometimes for people like me, that can be a frickin' terrifying thing. Like to actually have to, it can be more fun to just sit there and play in question land and just be like, okay, well, it could be this, it could be that. But first off, if you're low on time, you need to act, then questions can actually start getting in the way of progress.
Absolutely.
There's a few examples of like analysis paralysis is one, is when you've got like too many answers to pick from.
Mm.
Decision fatigue is when you're constantly being asked questions and you're spending the energy to answer them, and that energy is not infinite.
Yes.
And there's an example of people who lose, I can't remember which part of the brain it was, but it's a part that of the brain that gives you like emotional motivation to do things. People who get damage to that part of the brain can think very logically about all sorts of things, but they will take forever to pick an action and move forward with. It's like somebody with damage to that part of their brain, you go to McDonald's and they'll sit there and they'll just calmly analyze all the options for 3 hours and still be calmly analyzing options because there's no oomph to move in a certain direction.
I think a lot of us have probably felt several of those things, from analysis paralysis to decision fatigue. I know someone who's moving right now, and the decision fatigue of what to bring and what to leave has left her with no energy and quite a high level of frustration. And so when we find ourselves in either of those situations, what are ways we can resolve things like analysis paralysis? Or what do you do when you find yourself in analysis paralysis, where there's more information than you can even read and you don't know what direction to go in?
At least half the time I spiral.
So you keep it going. You
I go to
you double
TikTok.
down on it.
just spiral and gather potential answers into spreadsheets and documents and
Trying to find the needle in the haystack, or the piece of evidence so compelling that it discards the rest of the evidence.
something like that.
So there's the Socratic method, which is basically, let me ask you a whole bunch of questions until I could tell you the answer, but I'm going to keep asking questions until you give yourself the answer, kind of idea. And that there's one assumption that means that I know the answer and I'm going to give you the answer, but I'm just indirectly, and I'm smart and you're not. And thus that's the importance of the Socratic method, but also the importance of questions. Is someone already knows the answer. If we just ask the right person, they'll give us the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm hearing from you is, if I just kept asking myself the question, I'll get to the answer. Well, the problem is, I think I'm trying to get to the answer of community, the concept of community as a role, not to give you the answer, whether directly or indirectly, but it's to help support you in following through with the answer.
And I think this podcast is actually a fascinating example of that, where our dear friend Thomas has been collecting this information for years. If I can pull back the curtain a little bit, Thomas.
Pull the curtain back all the way.
Pull the soundproofing foam on your office back. It took kind of the community of me and Spencer to join Thomas in this endeavor for us to actually sit down and record this. Otherwise, it might have stayed on a hard drive somewhere. But like you're saying, Spencer, if you're kind of stuck in a situation, or if you find you can't move, there might be people around you that can help you move or support you in that, or who have a perspective that really resolves the whole thing.
Yeah. Which, there's a question that's been bothering me since the beginning of this episode, and that is, what genre are we in?
Oh,
Like, when I look for this podcast, what genre am I going to be put in? Because at some point we've got to pigeonhole us a little bit, not all the
Celebrity
way.
gossip. I said it.
Celebrity gossip.
So anyway,
Whichever genre gets the most people that need to hear it to hear it. There's
off
my
Broadway musicals.
my non-answer answer. Yeah, I saw my Broadway musical on my screen share. I'm opening Spotify because I've got a few podcasts in there. I'm curious what their categories are. Got things like rationally speaking, within reason, cognitive bias, you are not so smart.
It's good. Let's name drop all the competitors.
Competitors, all ships, all rising tides and such. However it goes. A rising tide raises all boats. There it is.
Got there in the end.
Yeah, I got there eventually. That's something we talk a lot about in the writing community, is that there's, especially when it comes to the market share of potential readers, there's always more. Like
Yeah.
there's tons of people. I don't know.
And so,
I mean, is this science? Is it a reason? Is it philosophy? Is it self-help?
that's where it's like, well, we could take this podcast, and we're both have partially decided this, but partially not. We could take this into politics, okay? And we could say, well, the questions that we're going to ask for the foreseeable future is anything related to politics, or anything related to social issues, or anything related to hot topics that will get us a lot of views on TikTok right now. I don't think that that's what we've decided on, but it's definitely an option. Well, I mean, Chris, we can give you a 5-minute little segment if you want.
Let me tell you what the government needs to be doing. I need 3 things. I need corn, I need my gun, and I need my dog. The end.
Do you feed the dog corn?
Dog, see?
Does the dog have the gun?
It's an outdoor dog.
It's an outdoor dog. Takes care of himself.
Exactly.
We could follow into celebrity gossip. We could, because there's a lot of statements that influencers use, and they, whether they know it or not, are using in the influencer space, are using a lot of cognitive science to make decisions to convince people to buy stuff, or to follow and like and subscribe, right? Or we could leave it more general into psychology, philosophy, etc.
I think one of the biggest things that I want to do is to help people think better and to question their own thinking, not necessarily point anybody in any direction of what to think, unless it's about the topic of thinking, if that makes sense. I'm getting a little meta here. Like, I don't want to tell people the right answers to the questions, but I've done a lot of thinking and research on what are good questions to ask, because it's good to ask questions, but not all questions are as useful as every other question. When it comes to some of those other things as well, one reason that I also want to focus on the process of thinking, the process of questioning, more than any specific topic. We might touch on like political things or things like that. One reason that science fiction is so helpful, or just fiction in general, for analyzing your own society, is that you can get rid of the flags that immediately put up people's defensive barriers. Meaning, like, let's say you want to talk about nations, relationships, especially when it comes to race and violence and religion and stuff like that. If you bring up existing religions, existing states, existing race, then you're going to immediately put up people's defensive barriers. And one thing that I want to do is to get people to be able to think about processes for questioning themselves without starting those backfire effects or those reactance effects, where you say, hey, here's an example of a Democrat using some really faulty logic. It might actually be a good example of faulty logic, but the biases, the emotional my team versus their team stuff that's going to come in is going to be really disruptive to the process of better understanding the logic. There was some research I read that talked about them showing the data was like half fake or whatever, but they showed conservatives and progressives information about climate change and data for or against. And everybody was really good at finding the flaws in the logic against their preferred conclusion, and really bad at finding the flaws in the logic for their preferred conclusion. Like, there is this automatic lens that goes up when we have our teams decided, that makes it so hard to tell the differences, or to analyze our own thoughts as critically. So you kind of have to, in some cases, you have to learn these skills agnostic of certain topics that will raise those emotional spikes.
And so, Thomas, I heard two things in that, one of which is help, which I don't know if self-help is a topic or a category that we want to be associated with, but it sounds like that is one ingredient. And I think the second thing you brought up is that we have to be aware of what topics and subjects we're discussing, because that might immediately shut down the curiosity and inquisitiveness of the listener based on their own biases and conclusions. And that is neither, I would say it's neither good nor bad. It doesn't help them hear us, but this lens of looking at things through cognitive biases might be helpful for people who are already locked in or are on the fence. I'm not even going to say either thing. I'll say who are being actively manipulated through communication. Because I feel like that's an ingredient of this, is how do we give people these cognitive tools to avoid being manipulated and avoid patterns of thought which cause suffering, I guess would be one of the reasons why I find this to be interesting. But I'm really glad you brought this up, Spencer, because as you're saying, we could go in many directions and apply this formula in many ways, which may or may not, which will help people, but in certain dimensions. And so I'm interested, Spencer, in where you see your response to your question of what genre is this?
Well, I'm not allowed to make answers. I'm here just to ask questions. So I don't. No, I mean, there's a part of me is like, crap, man. I don't know the answer to it necessarily myself. I definitely think just through the course of a week, I hear statements, and it's from influencers, it's from religion, it's from politics, it's from work, where people will make a statement and I'm like, interesting. That's a really bold statement to make. And there's a lot to unpack in just that single statement. And so there's not a single place that I feel that we would ever want to pin ourselves down into, other than saying, hey, from politics, from science, from this thing today, this was popular, or this was well said today, or not well said, but well known as being said today in the news. Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. And I feel like that's a lot of what we want to do, because everything originates from questions. It originates from our desire to not try to avoid the answer for as long as possible, so that we can better understand why are things being said the way they are. And so I think the closest place is either psychology or science, psychological. Wait, I said that twice.
That's okay. One thing this makes me think a lot about is, especially when we were talking about, and when I say we, I mean me talking to either Spencer or Chris on the phone, being like, what should I do? Should I go get a master's degree, or should I actually start talking to people about critical thinking? One thing that I think it was Chris that brought up to me was modeling good behavior, or modeling good self-introspective skills. And so that's definitely something I want to do with this. There's a lot of different tactics and skills that you can use to analyze something or analyze yourself, make a decision that's at least good enough for now, and moving forward, and feeling okay with it not being perfect, or feeling okay with updating it later. then this whole exercise that we're doing right now in this podcast and that we were doing on the phone is an example of social rationality. It's one of the many lenses of rationality that scientists study. And most of the time, when people think about it, they think about think about rationality, think about being an individual and thinking better. The thing is, we've got a lot of motivation in us to not think better. Jesus gave a great example when he says something along the lines of beware or it's easier for you to notice the speck in somebody else's eye than the mountain in your own. Just kidding. I know it's a log, but I want to give a bigger sense of scale. It's like a speck in someone else's eye and the mountain in your own. There are literally observable biases and shortcuts that we take for protecting our own egos and protecting our own ideas. In fact, our ability to reason probably mostly evolved to win arguments and to justify and explain what we just did. Not
That
necessarily.
was the less popular Andrew Carnegie book.
Yes. Not necessarily to actually understand why we do what we do, but to just explain it so in a social context it works. So when we come to social rationality, there's some research done about an individual, no matter how educated or intelligent, is not going to be more rational than a group of humble, curious, self-critical people willing to criticize and be criticized, working together on a problem. Because of that speck and that beam phenomena. If you are willing to be corrected and willing to help correct other people, then you can help spot the beams and the specks in each other's eyes. And you can bounce off of each other and get out of the spiral of protecting your own ego. That's why you got to do more than just sit alone with your thoughts, because you have guardrails in your brain to protect you from feeling too bad about yourself.
Well, most of us do. Some of us have to use medication.
And that kind of points back towards your earlier comment, Spencer, on the community aspect of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of what made me think about it. You were saying something about the community aspect of asking questions, and that's probably, I don't want to say a good point to stop. I kind of want to wrap it up at that topic, on the topic of using a community or using social relationships to make the most use of questions. How do we do that? There we go. I made it a question.
That sounds like a great place to stop, because we always end on a good question.
Ooh, I like that.
Well, thanks for listening to the Questionistas. Hope you tune in next time.